The name of the story, The Letter Beneath the Floorboards. Ellie adjusted her backpack as she stepped through the tall grass, her boots crunching softly against the overgrown path. The sun was sinking low behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. In front of her stood the old farmhouse, weathered, abandoned, and leaning slightly to one side, as though it were exhaling its last breath. A relic from another time. She had seen it in her architecture professor's slideshow just a week ago. A forgotten gem of rural design, he'd said. Go explore. Find history beneath the dust. And now she was here, notebook in hand, heart unexpectedly racing. Ellie pushed open the creaking wooden door, careful not to disturb the silence too violently. Inside, Tom had stood still. Dust floated in the golden light, dancing above the faded wooden floors and broken picture frames. A piano stood in the corner, its keys yellowed, a few missing. She wandered deeper into the house, pausing in what must have once been a living room. There, beside a cold fireplace, lay a bundle of letters tied with fraying string. She hesitated. There was something intimate, sacred even, about the stack of old paper, as though she just stumbled into someone else's soul. But her curiosity tugged harder than her guilt. Ellie picked up the top letter, careful not to tear the fragile paper. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it. April 3rd, 1944. My dearest Margaret, the war is loud tonight. The ground trembles with every step we take, and still, your voice is louder in my head. I hear you reading to me, the way you did when rain pinned us in the old barn. They say we'll move soon. East, I think. Maybe further. There's frost on everything here, even in April. But I keep your photograph in my pocket. It keeps me warm. Promise me you'll keep writing, even if I can't always answer. Your words matter more than anything. Yours always, James. Ellie didn't realize she was holding her breath until she finished reading. The air in the room felt different now, heavier, charged. She sat down slowly on the dusty floorboards, the letter trembling in her hands. She read it again and again, like a spell she couldn't shake. Somewhere between the faded ink and the aching words, something inside her shifted. Who was James? Who was Margaret? And why had their story been left behind? The sun had long dipped below the horizon when Ellie finally rose from the floor, her jeans dust-stained, her heart strangely full. She gathered the rest of the bundle and carefully untied the string, revealing 5 more letters, each dated between March and June 1944. She didn't open them yet. Instead, she wandered back to her borrowed car, the farmhouse silhouetted behind her like a ghost. That night, in the dim attic room of the bed and breakfast, Ellie lit a single lamp, wrapped herself in a worn blanket, and began to read. May 12th, 1944. My darling Margaret, they've given us only a few minutes, but I needed to write. Your last letter came with the scent of lavender. I don't know how, but it did. It nearly undid me. Today, a boy no older than 16 cried beside me before we even saw the front line. I sat with him until he fell asleep. I want to tell him about you, about how you love painting and how you once made a picnic in the middle of December just to make me laugh. But I didn't. Some things feel too precious for this place. I dreamt of you last night. You were standing by the garden fence, waving. You had that little blue ribbon in your hair, the one you always wore when you were nervous. Were you nervous, my love? I felt like you were trying to tell me something. I'll write again as soon as I can. Yours in every breath. James. Ellie pressed her hand against her lips, her chest tight. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, the musty air of the attic gave way to something else entirely. Flashback. England, 1943. James stood under the apple tree, his uniform too crisp, too new. The late afternoon sun filtered through the branches as Margaret approached, her dress fluttering in the wind, a picnic basket in hand. You're early, she teased, glancing at the watch pinned to her dress. I thought soldiers were never early. James smiled, a slow, thoughtful smile that reached his eyes. I couldn't stay away. They sat in the shade, and she handed him a sandwich. Cheese and mustard. Like you like. He laughed. You remembered. Margaret's fingers brushed his as she passed him the tea flask, and for a moment, They stayed still, the world quiet around them. "You'll come back, won't you?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was too soft, like it might crack if she tried to be brave. James didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked. "If I don't," he whispered, "promise me you'll keep painting. Promise me you'll live a beautiful life." Margaret blinked fast, nodding, biting her lip. "You'll come back," she said again, as if saying it enough would make it true. Present day. Ellie opened her eyes, breath caught in her throat. The letter lay across her lap. The night outside pulsed with crickets and wind, but inside her, silence. It was no longer just curiosity. She needed to know how it ended. She needed to know what happened to James. The morning came with fog wrapped tight around the hills. Ellie stood outside the farmhouse again, this time armed with a thermos of coffee and determination burning in her chest. She had to know more. Back in town, the local library was quiet. Only the sound of soft page turning and the occasional cough breaking the stillness. Ellie approached the counter, clutching a copy of one of the letters in her hand. An older woman in a knitted cardigan looked up from her reading glasses. "Can I help you, dear? I'm looking for information on a man named James Hawthorne. He served in the Second World War. I found these in an old house near the edge of town." The librarian raised an eyebrow and took the paper. Her eyes scanned the page. "This handwriting, it's beautiful," she said softly. Then, after a moment, she looked back at Ellie. "Hawthorne, that name's familiar. I think you'll want the local Veterans Archive. Downstairs. Ask for Carol." Ellie thanked her and hurried down the narrow staircase to a small, windowless room. A younger woman sat behind a computer, typing slowly. "Carol," the woman smiled. "Yes. I'm looking for records on a soldier. James Hawthorne." At the mention of the name, Carol leaned back in her chair, blinking slowly. "You said Hawthorne?" "Yes. Do you know him?" Carol hesitated. "Well, not him, but I know of someone who might." 2 hours later, Ellie was sitting at a small cafe table, nervously stirring her coffee. Across from her sat a man, mid-20s, dark tousled hair, a leather notebook tucked under his arm. He looked like someone who didn't like being pulled into things. "I'm sorry to bother you," Ellie began, "but they told me you were his grandson." The man, Caleb, nodded slowly, his eyes unreadable. "James Hawthorne was my grandfather." She paused, unsure of how much to reveal. But then she reached into her bag and carefully handed him the first letter. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he exhaled low and heavy. "I've never seen these." "They were in the farmhouse," Ellie said. "Hidden, tied, in a bundle." Caleb looked away, toward the window. "My grandmother, Margaret, she never talked much about him after the war. He didn't come back. That's all we ever knew." Ellie watched him. There was something fragile in the space between them now, like a thread pulled tight. "I want to know what happened," she whispered. "To both of them." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "You're chasing ghosts." "Maybe," she said, "but I think they want to be found." He looked at her then, truly looked. His gaze was sharp, intelligent, cautious, but behind it, something else stirred. Recognition, a sense that he, too, had always wondered. After a long silence, Caleb nodded once. "All right, let's find out. Some stories begin with a letter. Ours began with a silence that asked to be broken." The next day, Ellie sat in the passenger seat of Caleb's dusty old pickup truck, a map spread across her knees, and a thermos of tea wedged between them. The sky above was gray and heavy, and the narrow country road twisted like a faded memory between hedges and fields. "I still don't understand why she never told anyone," Ellie said quietly. Caleb didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the road, fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. She was quiet. He finally said, "Kind. A painter. After he died, I think part of her never came back." They were headed toward Brookfield, the village where Margaret had grown up. According to the library records, she had lived in a small cottage with her sister after the war. Ellie had found the address in the corner of one of the letters, a place James had promised to visit when he returned. But he never did. The cottage was still standing. Ivy had claimed the walls, and the paint on the shutters had peeled into thin, curling strips. A woman in her 70s answered the door, thin, elegant, with striking blue eyes. "You must be talking about my Aunt Margaret," she said after Ellie explained. I remember those letters. She used to sit on the porch and read them over and over. Every year on the same day. What day? Caleb asked gently. The woman smiled faintly. June 15th, the day she got the last letter. After that, she never opened another. Later, Ellie sat alone in the backyard of the cottage, beneath an ancient plum tree. She held one of the unopened envelopes, yellowed, edges fraying. Caleb joined her, sitting cross-legged in the grass. You think he died before he could send it? She shook her head. No, I think he wrote it knowing she'd need it someday. Like he was leaving her one last piece of himself. She ran her fingers along the seal, but didn't open it. Instead, she looked at Caleb. I've read his words so many times now. I feel like I know him. Caleb looked out across the field, his voice soft. I don't remember much about him. I was only 6 when my grandmother died. But I remember one thing. She used to say, real love doesn't end when someone's gone. It waits. Ellie smiled, eyes shimmering. Maybe this is it, the waiting part ending. Flashback. June 1944, somewhere in France. Rain hammered the canvas of a tent. James sat hunched over a battered wooden crate, his hands ink-stained, his fingers shaking from the cold. He reread Margaret's last letter, lips moving silently. Then he began to write. June 10th, 1944. My beloved Margaret, I saw a boy die today. He looked like your brother Thomas, the same crooked smile. I carried him half a mile through mud and fire, and still, I couldn't save him. I've never felt so heavy. But then I read your words again. You wrote, no matter where you are, my heart knows you. That line kept me breathing. If this is my last letter, and it may be, I want you to know something simple. I loved you with everything I had. I still do. If you're reading this one day, I hope you're sitting under that plum tree. I hope the wind is soft. I hope someone kind is near you. Live for me, March. Love for me. Yours beyond time. James. Back in the present, Ellie sat in silence, her fingers curled around the letter. Caleb didn't speak. The wind stirred the grass gently, like a whisper from a time long gone. The rain had stopped by the time they reached the cemetery. It stretched out before them, rows of identical white stones, each carrying a name, a date, and silence. Ellie stepped lightly across the gravel path, her fingers curled around the umbrella's handle, though she no longer needed it. She spotted the name first. James Hawthorne, 1919 to 1944. Forever yours. A simple engraving. 3 words. That was all. Caleb stood beside her, not saying anything. The weight of it all pressed down like fog. Not just the knowledge of death, but the quiet echo of a life that had been loved and left behind. Ellie knelt slowly, placing a single wildflower on the grave. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her coat and pulled out the final letter, the one Margaret had never opened. She looked up at Caleb. Do you want to read it? He shook his head. You should. So she did. July 1st, 1944. My Margaret, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I'm writing it anyway, because you deserve to know what you meant to me, not just in soft words, but in every moment I was given. You were the warmth in every cold morning, the calm when everything else broke. They say we go soon, maybe even tonight. I'm not afraid anymore. I think that's what love does. It takes the fear out of dying. I won't ask you to wait for me, but if you ever find this letter, know that my love never left your side. Not for a second. With all of me. James. Ellie wiped a tear from her cheek. For a while, neither of them moved. Then Caleb crouched down beside her. He loved her. Completely. Ellie nodded. And she carried that love her whole life. He looked at her. And now you've carried it too. They sat together in silence, the breeze rustling the trees above them like a song with no words. Then Caleb did something unexpected. He reached for her hand, and Ellie didn't pull away. That evening, they didn't speak much as they drove back. But something had shifted. The space between them was no longer filled with unanswered questions. It was filled with understanding. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. The farmhouse looked different now. Maybe it was the late golden hour sunlight casting long shadows across the porch. Or maybe it was Ellie, carrying with her not just the letters, but everything they now meant. Caleb followed her inside, ducking beneath the crooked doorway. The silence inside was no longer empty. It felt sacred. They moved slowly through the rooms, brushing dust from old photographs, setting down the letters one by one on the wooden table near the window. The last rays of sun poured in, spilling across the pages like a final blessing. Ellie paused at the fireplace, the place where she had first found James's words. He wrote them knowing he might never come back, she said quietly, but also knowing someone someday might need them. Caleb watched her, leaning against the doorframe. Maybe that someone was you. She turned toward him, eyes bright but uncertain. Why does it feel like I'm mourning someone I've never met? Because love leaves traces, he said, even across generations. She exhaled slowly, tears caught just behind her lashes. I wanted a love like theirs. Something that deep, that lasting. You still can, Caleb said softly. Ellie looked at him, really looked. His voice, low and steady, held something different now. Something warmer. Something open. I didn't expect you, she whispered. I didn't expect you either, he said. Then a small, quiet smile. But I'm glad you're here. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of a clock long since stopped. Then Ellie stepped toward him, and in the center of a room built from ghosts and memory, Caleb reached out, not in hesitation, but in knowing, and touched her face gently. She leaned into his hand, eyes closed. And just like that, the house breathed again. Later, they sat together on the floor near the fireplace, legs tangled, sharing the same blanket, drinking lukewarm tea. The letters rested between them, no longer lonely. Ellie traced a finger along the edge of the top page. What should we do with them? Caleb thought for a long moment. Share them. Like publish. Maybe. Or maybe an exhibit. A place where people can read them. Feel them. Ellie smiled. A story that never got told. Finally heard. She looked at him. Would you help me? Caleb nodded. Every step. And in that quiet, something new was born. Not just between them, but in Ellie herself. She came here chasing someone else's love story. But somewhere along the way, she found her own. Spring had finally come to the countryside, and with it, a gentle warmth that seeped into Ellie's bones and softened the edges of everything. The small-town gallery was buzzing with quiet excitement. Ellie and Caleb had worked tirelessly to prepare the exhibit, a collection of James's letters, photographs from the war, and personal mementos from Margaret's life. Visitors came in steady streams, their faces reflecting curiosity, sorrow, and sometimes unexpected smiles. Ellie stood near the entrance, watching as an elderly man paused before a letter and wiped a tear from his eye. Caleb was beside her, his hand finding hers, fingers interlacing naturally. It feels like they're still here, Ellie whispered. Caleb nodded. Love stories don't end with a goodbye. After the exhibit, Ellie and Caleb walked through the blooming orchard near the farmhouse, the air thick with the scent of blossoms and possibility. You've changed everything, Caleb said softly. Ellie smiled, looking up at the clear sky. Maybe I was the one who needed saving. He laughed, a light, honest sound. Maybe we both did. Their hands found each other again, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ellie sat beneath the plum tree, the same tree from the letters, a gentle breeze stirring the petals. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen and began to write. Not a letter to a lost love, but a letter to the future, to love waiting to be found, to hope that refuses to fade. Her words flowed softly, carrying with them the promise of beginnings. Dear Caleb, this is just the first page of our story, one written not with distance or longing, but with open hearts and shared dreams. Together, we will build more than memories. We will build a life. With all my heart. Ellie. End of story. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.